By nationality, I'm now Portuguese. So two university groups invited me to speak to their campuses on the topic of freedom of speech and cancel culture, and then also on hate speech. Now, these are high-octane requests, meaning they can blow up really, really quickly, especially because in the end, there was an open question and answer time. And they said they could ask us or ask me anything. So after making sure that everyone understood our European right to offend one another, which is our European right, it's a long story and it took me an hour to explain it, I challenged them with the Bible. And I challenged them of how we could do better than cancel culture. And how hate for a Christian, a disciple of Jesus, is really not a response or possibility. And yes, I have the freedom to speak from the Bible because on the publicity, just like here, well, less here, but when the students advertised it, they said that I was a pastor in Estoril, Portugal, that I was the General Secretary of the European Evangelical Alliance. So there was no possibility that anybody didn't know that this was a religious person coming to speak to them. So I had full permission to use the Bible, and I know that a lot of times you cannot. So after what I thought were my very engaging talks, came the questions. And at first, all of them were anonymous, so they used Kahoot. And all of them were anonymous, but as the questions came up, the first couple I knew were from Christians. I mean, it was just obvious. They were lovely questions. I mean, they were very biblical type of questions. They wanted me to talk about Jesus and his love. It was all very nice, all very easy to answer, all about loves and hugs. And then the non-Christians wanted their time, and up came their questions. And here's just a few of the sampling. Isn't the Bible hate speech? Doesn't the Bible contradict itself? What do you think about homosexuality? Does God hate LGBTQ plus people? If I don't want to use someone's new pronouns, do I have to? What about freedom of speech? So these are real questions. These are loaded questions with emotion, with hurt, with confusion, with a lot of misunderstanding, but also with honest curiosity. I didn't feel that anybody was hostile. They just really wanted to know. And these are secular university students. And I realized that most of the questions had a background, and that background needed to come to the foreground to be answered the way that really didn't just touch their brain, but touched their heart and caused some sort of transformation, or at least the beginning of transformation. And as I said, I was an invited guest, so I had all the freedom in the world to say what I said. And as you sit in your classrooms or stand in your classrooms, most of you do not have that freedom. But you have the same questions being asked of you. If not verbally, then it's in their minds and it's in their heart. They want to know the same things and more. These questions are a direct challenge to our Christian worldview, and so how do we deal with them? How, in general, do we deal with the pressures around us? And as I said, I have two sons in school. One is in grade 12, one is in grade 10. And they come back and tell me who's sitting in their classroom and some of the issues that they're dealing with, including the whole transgender, changing sex. I mean, they have everything in their classrooms. So how do we deal with all of that pressure when we're conflicted because we know the truth, but we're being asked not to tell it? How do we deal with our conflict of ideas, of our values, of our faith beliefs? So I thought of some of the ways in the past that have been used, and in some cases are still being used. So there's war, so death to the one we disagree with. There's a bit of that happening in the Ukraine, but more so in other parts of the world, in Yemen, for example, Myanmar. Prison, just take them out of the way, hide them. Socially, and often sadly in the church, shame, humiliate them into silence, or ostracize them, just remove them, or you can even put them on mute. They can stay, but we won't listen to you. So the new reality, and rather sudden reality for many of you, is that you have to swallow all of this down. You're not so free to say what you want to see, or say because it's in your curriculum, it's sitting in chairs in front of you, it's written into the law in lots of our countries what you must teach and what you must not say. And any stepping outside the line, you could face discipline or even have your job threatened. So what do you do when you feel you can't do anything? When the whole system seems determined to undermine you and shut you down, to silence you, and to force you to teach these new, what they call realities. Well, I propose that Jesus dealt with the exact same things. Okay? Maybe they were called something different. But they were the same type of things. He lived in a time of an unstable government. There was an unjust and cruel hierarchy in society. There was an incredible amount of sexual exploitation, of abuse, homosexuality, and there were eunuchs. So we have a gender issue in Jesus' time as well. So yes, it's true, there was no chance of changing sex, but barring that, Jesus lived in a powder keg that was just ready to explode. So I think that Jesus' way of dealing with the issues around him, the societal pressures that he lived in, and the conflicts that were really about to explode, is the best way that you and I can respond to what's happening in our culture, our society, and our world. And so how did he do it? He subverted it. And I know that sounds all 007 and cloak and dagger, but what do I mean by subverting culture? So the definition of subvert is to undermine the power and authority of an established system or institution. We're going to do a mic change. So let me just repeat. The definition of subvert is to undermine the power and authority of an established system or institution. So it's to destabilize, unsettle, overthrow, overturn, or bring down. And I know that hardly sounds very Christian and even less Jesus-like, but actually it's exactly what he did. And I think it's what we're all called to do throughout the New Testament. But before we get to Jesus, we need to understand and remember the type of society that he was born into. And here's a reminder of Israel's history. Because sometimes we're tempted to think that this, what we're living in, has never happened before. I remind you of Ecclesiastes. There is nothing new under the sun. It's just called different things. But the same powers of evil that were alive and well in ancient Israel are the exact same powers that live here. And they do their same work the same way. And why? Because it's always worked. Okay? So let's just take a quick run through Israel's history. Genesis chapter 12. God establishes Abraham and his offspring as a special people. And so they're going to receive blessings and then responsibilities. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all people on earth will be blessed through you. Spoiler, Jesus. And here is where actually the subversion of culture begins. Subversion God's way. Abraham and his family were to change their world by showing what God could do and would do for his people, for Abraham's family and those adopted into it. So Abraham wasn't supposed to attack the people around him. He wasn't supposed to, we're just going to go through all the mics in the building today.
We have 3, we can use all I know.
And I also have sons, so I yell a lot, so that's right. So Abraham's family and all those who were adopted into it were really supposed to embrace the nations around them to show them what the love of God could do to a group of people. He wasn't supposed to bully them or even destroy them. He was supposed to be a blessing to all nations. So the plan struggled a lot, and from early on. Abraham's family really enjoyed the blessing bit, but weren't so wild about being a blessing bit. So they messed up, and here there is no criticism and no judgment, because we do it all the time too. After years of struggle, Abraham's grandchildren find themselves in Egypt, first as special and privileged guests, and then as slaves. So 400 years go by, and finally God delivers them in a not so subversive way, 10 plagues that end in a mass death. But Moses does his best to get the people on track, back to the original plan, but it was easier said than done. And just like in many classrooms all over the world, the second the teacher leaves the room for 5 minutes, there's absolute chaos. Well, Moses goes up the mountain for 40 days, and when he comes back, there's absolute chaos. Nothing has changed, nothing new under the sun. You have a problem with this, blame Israel. Rules are established on how to keep society in order and to remain faithful to God. And again, as you know better than most, just because there are rules does not mean they're going to be followed. So there's ups and downs, to say the least. And as I said, sometimes we think that this culture is so complex, so difficult to stand as Christians, as followers of Jesus. But let's remember what Israel had to face. So as they start to take the promised land, they're confronted with cultural differences, with different ways of thinking, different religions, different values. You have people worshiping all sorts of gods. You had, as they would walk by, they would see some nations throwing their children into a fire, burning. Anyone seen that lately? Try dealing with that. This is a mess. It's tough. It's difficult. And as Israel got together, they said, what is going on? How do we stand against this kind of depravity? There is really nothing new under the sun. God has warned them that this was going to happen, but they're enticed by what they see. Some of this really excites them, and they start to leave God behind. And so God brings in the judges, the kings, and the prophets, and each group is responsible for bringing the people back to God and to help them remain faithful to the truth. They have lost their mission to the world completely. But there is always a remnant. There will always be a remnant. Pockets of people who will continue to change their world, and mostly through subversion. So Esther and Mordecai, they subverted Haman's plan of murdering all the Jews through careful planning and wise counsel. They didn't do a direct hit. They did it the back door. Daniel became a wise man and influenced 2 kings and affected the laws of a pagan land. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego subverted the king's decree by refusing to bow down to an idol. Now, very true, it was helpful that they didn't burn up when they were thrown into the furnace. That would have been a good thing to do. The prophets were not at all subversive. They named the problem, screamed about it, called for change, gave warnings, and were largely ignored, and many were killed. That might be a red flag for us. Not that we shouldn't be prophets. And if God tells us to speak out loud, we need to do it. But maybe we should try a little subtlety first. Then we have 400 years of silence. And it's not that nothing happened in 400 years. A lot of things happened. Israel lost its autonomy. Rome gained control. Religion was now a money-making enterprise that was also power-based. And there was this remnant. There always was and always will be. But they were small. And they included some really unlikely people in God's plan. So Zechariah, he was a faithful priest, but he was hardly famous. He had no children, and his wife Elizabeth was barren. Mary and Joseph, the carpenter, they were unknowns. Not wealthy, not famous, no power, but God uses them too. God subverts our understanding of getting things done by using these people, because we always expect the wealthy, the powerful, the well-spoken, the popular, and the charismatic. Those are the people that are going to lead the church forward. And God chooses complete unknowns. And Jesus is born. And he stays undercover for 30 years. And we're going to talk about that more next session. So when Jesus is 30, he continues the subversion of our belief system by teaching us the kingdom values, which stand the cultural norms that they had completely on their head. So the rich are poor, and the poor are rich. The strong are weak, and the weak are strong. The first will be last, the last will be first, and the kingdom of God belongs to children. All of that was exactly what Rome did not agree with. All of this undermines or subverts the understanding we have of the way things work. It confronts our beliefs and our desires of what success and being blessed actually means. So Jesus starts his public ministry, and of all the people in all the world history, Jesus would have actually had the right and the ability and the authority to come into this culture with a big old stick and whack it down. But he doesn't. He knows God's original plan because he was part in planning it. He has the right to call out sin, to put his foot down, to bring complete and total societal change. And he will do it, just not the way people expected him to do it, or thought he should do it. The Jewish people were waiting for this Messiah, the great Savior, who would put Israel on the power map again. They wanted a warrior who would destroy Rome. They wanted things to go back to the good old days, without remembering that the good old days never existed. The good old days didn't exist for Israel, and they don't exist for us. This is where we get ourselves into a lot of trouble. We think, 40 years ago, this was so much easier. But go back 40 years, and no, it wasn't. It was just different. There were different problems. And you go back 50, 60 years ago, and you think, well, that must have been the good old days. Those were war babies coming out. They were traumatized kids. It wasn't easy. You just keep going back. In the good old days, in reality, were just tough, difficult. Nothing changes. No good old days. So Jesus wasn't going to come and reverse time. Heaven forbid, that would have been awful. Would you want to go back to when they were burning children to their gods? No. Jesus didn't come to turn back time. He came back to undo the damage that's been done. So over the course of 3 years of active ministry, he starts to do that. And in a way that nobody really expected. He subverted culture, including the religious culture and the political culture. And he starts the subversion by giving his longest and most subversive sermon, the Sermon on the Mount. This is the first sermon Jesus lays down, and he lays down the ethics of the kingdom. What type of person is a citizen of the kingdom of God? The poor, the mourners, the meek, the ones who are desperate for righteousness, the merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemakers, and the persecuted. That's how Jesus is about to subvert culture, by using all of the people that you would never, ever choose to run the world. So the rest of the chapter, and then it goes on into chapter 6 and ending in chapter 7, Jesus gives the detail on how these kind of people work things out in daily life. And so he talks about murder, adultery, divorce, oaths, revenge, enemies, generosity, prayers, fasting, priorities, anxiety, judging one another, resilience, steadfastness, truth, and wisdom. In other words, the whole Sermon on the Mount, 3 chapters, is about living so extremely counterculturally that by the nature of a life lived this way, people, society, religion, and government would change. It wasn't an all-out attack. It wasn't about starting a culture war. It wasn't about attacking or pulling down or trying to even bring governmental change intentionally. It was about a collective change of heart that would result in changes that no one could have ever imagined. Did it work? We're sitting here 2,000 years later as Christ followers from all nations in Europe. The subversion worked. Now, after all of that, I want to go back to Matthew 5, but I want to focus on verses 13 to 16. And this, for me, is the model of how we are to live, work, play, raise families, do our work as disciples of Jesus Christ. Disciples who don't live in a nice and easy society, but disciples who live in a challenging world. You know these passages. In fact, Marcus prayed this passage. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. What does salt do? That's not a rhetorical question. Yell it out. What does salt do?
Preserves.
Preserves?
Flavors.
Mhm.
Keeps
Sorry?
clean.
Keeps clean. God, you guys are all going through my list. You're awesome.
Gives flavor.
Gallons, eyes.
Okay? So my list gives flavor to bland food, preserves food. You all, at least I don't know if you all ate it, but I saw it yesterday. You had bacalhau, the codfish. When bacalhau was fished back several hundred years ago, there was not refrigerated ships. The only way they could do it was by salting it to death, making it something unknown, bringing it back to Portugal, throwing it in water, and let's see what happens. The people loved it so much that even though we have perfectly good refrigerators, we're still salting our fish. And we all love it. So it preserves food. It can clean a sore, obviously in small doses. It can refreshen and restore. Electrolytes are a largely saline solution. What is the subversive nature of salt? Does salt change the flavor of food?
Yes.
Does it change the flavor of food?
It adds.
It enhances it, right? So when you have a piece of steak and it doesn't have salt and you put it in your mouth, you go, that tastes like steak. Then you put some salt on it. It doesn't change to taste like chocolate, sadly. It still tastes like steak, but so much better. It enhances it. Does salt change the essence of food? No. It doesn't make bacalhau or codfish not bacalhau. It's still bacalhau. It just does keep the bad bacteria away. So salt is subversive. It changes what it's put on in a subtle way. It doesn't so much as change things as it enhances and improves things. So if we're salt of the earth, what are we supposed to do? How can we be as subversive as salt? So I think when I put this into a daily practice, give flavor to the conversations that are around us. Make them better. Doesn't mean that we'll always be able to give the gospel message. In fact, for most of you, that would be wrong and illegal in your school system. But it does mean that people walk away encouraged or challenged, maybe even perplexed with what they encountered. But it has enhanced what they were telling you. In these two conversations I had with university students, in both cases I was actually, because of the questions they asked, I was able to give the gospel message because they asked me. But well before we got to that stage, I just decided I was going to enhance the conversation. So when they talk to me about, is the Bible hate speech? Okay, let's take that. Let's not blow up at them and say, how dare you? This is Europe. They're allowed to offend me. It's our law. I decided to make it a better conversation. And so we just talked about it in an elevated way. And they were fine with it. In fact, it was very good. We enhance the public square with the way we speak, the topics that we choose to speak on, and the wisdom we have. So where there's rot and stench, we don't run away from it. We run to it and we clean it, and then we preserve it. That's what salt does. Our presence in society, in schools, in governments, and everywhere just makes the climate better. So I am a coordinator of a rugby club, as we are, and it is a secular club, and I have learned all sorts of interesting language, things that I actually had to go to Google to look up, what is that? And then was horrified. But everything started to change when my reaction to them was simply love and grace. I've noticed over the last 6 years, the conversation has changed. Maybe it doesn't when I'm not around. But when I'm around, things get elevated to a different level. One day I'll have the chance to share the gospel. But for now, I'm just giving them a little salt. And when you think about it, when you think about Jesus, who didn't want him around? Only those who enjoyed their bland little lives and wanted things to stay the same. So the religious elite. But everyone else wanted Jesus to come because they all recognized that Jesus brought the flavor. So he went to their weddings, their parties, their dinners. He was asked to just hang out with them. And even some said, hold our children. That's the kind of subversive faith and practice that Jesus had. So wherever he went, he seasoned the conversation. He preserved dignity and undermined the cultural status quo. So I'm going to give you 4 examples. John 4, famous, woman at the well. She was a mess. She came out when she came out, probably because she wanted to avoid all the conversations around who she was living with, the lifestyle she led. And Jesus comes up to her and he starts talking to her. So there was a subversion, number 1, of a societal norm. He spoke to her, a Samaritan woman. Number 2, he went outside of his own culture to a hated group by the Jews. She was a woman, and Jewish men did not talk directly to women, full stop, and certainly not to a Samaritan woman. And here was a Samaritan woman who had so many sexual relationships. She's not different from what's sitting in our classrooms. She's not different at all. So how does Jesus talk to her? Does he start with, you are a wicked woman. Change, and then we'll chat. Nope. You whore. How dare you? You disgusting, filthy, oversexed woman. Nope. He asks for her help. He humbles himself, allows her to lead the conversation, is gentle with her, saves her, and changes her life. He's not soft on sin. He tells her, you change your life of sin. So he's not soft on sin. He doesn't ignore sin. He doesn't start with it. He starts with a person. We even are so cruelly calling her the woman at the well. Jesus wouldn't have said, hey, woman at the well. He would have probably sat down and said, woman, I'm Jesus. What's your name? I can't imagine Jesus doing anything else. The Roman centurion, Matthew 8, chapter 8, verses 5 to 13. The Roman centurion is an enemy. 2 ways. He's a Roman and he's a Gentile. And yet there is such incredible respect on the part of the centurion and on the part of Jesus to come together. Not verbally, because the Roman centurion won't even come out to meet Jesus because he honors Jesus so much. And Jesus then says, wow, I'll do what you say because I haven't seen such great faith in anyone else I've met lately. Then the leper, Mark chapter 1, verse 40 to 42, completely socially separated, unclean, hard to look at. And Jesus does what in Mark 1:42? He talks to him, he heals him, but how does he heal him? Now we're talking the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He could stand here, the leper could stand there, and he could say, be healed, and he would have been healed. But he's a leper, so what does Jesus do? Mark is very specific. Jesus reached out his hand and touched him. That is subversion of culture. That should never, ever in a million years happened, but he doesn't. Nicodemus, John 3. So here's a Jewish leader, and he had influence, but he's a bit confused. So now it's your turn. Let me just check my time here. I'm gonna give you 10 minutes to get into groups. Whatever, how many people in a group? I will leave it to your criteria. Get together, and I want you to think of those 4 people, the woman at the well, the centurion, the leper, and Nicodemus. And I want you to think past their titles. And I want you to try to think of what they could represent in our culture today. So who's the woman in the well today? And I want you to think of your schools. Who are these people? These were actual real people. So I'm not saying they represented something, but they do represent something in all of our culture. So who are they? Think about it. 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and hear what you've done. Because of the time limitations that we have, what I'm going to do is I want to know what you think about this, but only one group can answer for each person. If you have other ideas that were not mentioned, then please come talk to me afterwards so that next time if I'm asked to give this talk, it will be even better because it'll have your ideas. So, is there a group who would like to share your thoughts on the woman at the well? Who is the woman at the well today?
Yeah, you had a great definition. Why not? Come on, well, there's something down. You can speak. I really like it.
If no one answers, the class gets a failing grade. The whole class.
Is that what Jesus would do?
Was what my teachers did. So, who would like to talk about the woman at the well? Who is she today? It's Marcus. Marcus is the woman at the well today.
Well, I said in the UK we have a perfect word for it, the tart in the classroom. The young lady, the young girl that really likes the attention of boys and men and shows it in her dressing and loves the boys and men actively.
Great, thank you. How about the Roman centurion? Who's the Roman centurion today? Possibly. There's no really right or wrong answers, right? It's just creative thinking. Go for it, Steph. You know.
Yeah, I'm feeling the pressure. We were thinking sort of the cool kind of sports guy who has influence, is popular, but it means we assume, oh, they wouldn't be interested in Jesus, they don't have questions, they've got it sorted, yeah.
Okay, so after this you need to come talk to me. I don't have that at all. But it's very good, so I want to add that. So just make sure you talk to me after. Okay, great. What about the leper? Who's the leper today?
The untouchable kids.
Okay, can you...
Difficult in the classroom. You want to get rid of them.
Children with special needs.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I don't have that down either. Remind me of that. Yep. Nicodemus. Oh, did you want to say something else on that? Or do you want to do Nicodemus?
No,
Or you want to do the leper?
yeah,
Go for it.
yeah, proceed.
Whatever floats your boat.
Okay, just real quick, in U.S. culture, I would say it's changed to be white men, because U.S. culture are telling white men that they shouldn't have a voice, they should just sit down and listen to the pain of other people, the quote-unquote oppressed people, if you will. So I think white men in U.S. culture.
Okay, that's good. I need to remember that too. Nicodemus. Nobody knows. Poor Nick.
No, we had discussion that we were, I think specifically with the 5 of us from Poland, but we thought that our Nicodemuses in the school are the children who are growing up in the culture that is very religious, but the culture that doesn't really preach that much of a personal relationship with Christ. So many of our students there's a amount of our students who know all about God, but they don't really know God. And these are our Nicodemuses in our classrooms. But that will be applicable very much in our culture. I don't know others.
No,
Probably Portugal too, but.
very much so. That's awesome.
There's one more
Oh,
hand.
yeah.
Yeah, Nicodemus, I think it could be not the top boss, but the middle boss, and it's not a relation of the person, but it knows how to kind of sneak around and don't be responsible, don't be touched inside.
Yeah, awesome. So here's some of my thoughts. Who's the women at the well? I very much agree with what this group said. I took out the male-female aspect, and I think it really, the woman at the well for me becomes this sexually confused, lost, lonely, and desperate love for generation, whether they're male or female, because sexuality has really been pushed down their throat. Love is hard. They're the children of the culture that has divorced the most, and they realize, or they think, love does not work, so they replace love with sex, because sex you can feel, and it feels more real to them than love. So this is a generation that love is hard to explain to them because they have never really felt it, or they've already been disappointed by it. They're the children in school who display inappropriate behaviors, which is what this group was saying, because it's the only way they can feel they can get the love, the attention, and the acceptance they need to survive. For me, that's the woman at the well. The centurion, I like your answer better than mine. But yeah, I think I need to add that, you know, that person that's kind of, or student that's in charge. It could also be a teacher. The Roman centurion could be a teacher because it's ruling. It could also be your hierarchy, you know, the untouchable, we're all kind of in academic spheres, but you know, we're the teachers and they're the directors, right? So whatever they say, it's not going to be to our favor. The leper again, I need to add some of what you said, but these are the children that we don't know what to do with, and they disturb us deeply, and we also consider them unclean. Each of us has different people in mind, but the common ones, today's world, I think, gender confused, trans children, the LGBTQ plus, immigrants, they come with different values and different religions, we just don't know what to do with them. They're untouchable almost. And Nicodemus, again, we were on the same wavelength, but I need to get more ideas from the Polish contingency, because it's very much what happens in Portugal. But the people who hold the power, maybe local government or school government, the school directors, it might even be a church leader, actually, who you go to with some of the issues that you have, and they stare with you like a deer in headlights and haven't a clue how to answer your questions because it's not gone to their heart yet. They've not identified with the culture around them. As Jesus speaks with each of these people, he does some incredible things that I think you and I can imitate. And against these things, there is no law. They're not overt, they're subversive, they take time. But we see with each one that Jesus is gentle and he listens. Interesting, when you follow the conversations, most of the time we hear Jesus listening first. He's honest. He doesn't always lead the conversation. He's never in a rush to get his message or his point across. There's no panic with Jesus. He always deals with the person and not their label. This is a big one for me in this culture. This is the number one question that these university students answered me. What do you think about homosexuals? And I said, homosexuals is a label. If you want, I can tell you what I think about you, and I love you. And I can tell you what Jesus thinks about homosexuals. He loves the person. He doesn't think of heterosexual. When he looks at us as his children, he doesn't think, oh, there's Connie, my heterosexual child. He thinks of Connie, or whatever the name he has for me. And I said, Jesus does that with all of us. He doesn't look at your blackness or your whiteness. He doesn't look at your education. He doesn't look at your sexuality. He looks at you. And we need to learn that. That's why he got through to the woman at the well. That's why the woman caught in adultery was so in awe of him. Because he dealt with a person and not the adulteress, not with a whore. He dealt with a person. That's a biggie, obviously, because I just went on for about 5 minutes on that. He never ignores sin, but it's not the place where he starts. Never, never think that I'm trying to tell you sin isn't important and doesn't need to be dealt with. It definitely does. We are all sinful. I'm just not so sure it's the first place we ought to start with this generation. At least in the southern part of Europe, including, I'll put Poland in there because you're a Catholic culture. So we all deal with the same thing. The Catholic Church over centuries pounded people with sin. And now they're tired of hearing it. They still are sinful, but now how do we get to them? He always backed up everything he said with that truth. So the law, he was not soft on truth. And then he backed it up with practical truth. So healings oftentimes, miracles. And so we still have the law that we can and need to work with. And we still have our rights of freedom of religion and belief and the freedom of expression. We need to know those laws, especially if you're part of the European Union, and understand your rights within them because they are important. And when the European Evangelical Alliance goes to court with you, it's that law that we call upon. Two laws that we call upon. The law of expression, freedom of expression, and of religion and belief. And we've gone to court with people in Finland and in Bulgaria, and we've won. Because European law today is still for freedom of speech.
Amen.
We also need to understand that although we have all of this freedom, and when I said in Europe, we actually do have the freedom to be offensive, as Christians, we do not. And that law is above all things. What I say might offend you, that's different. But we have to be wise. We have to know what we can say, what we should say, what we should hold our tongue. And we shouldn't aim to be offensive because we can. We should aim for a higher goal of love. Now, most of us cannot do miracles. If anyone can, please come talk to me after. So how do we back it up practically? Again, that's for later on. We know how this ends, though. I don't think I'm giving any spoilers here. If I am, you really do need to talk to me after. But Jesus eventually dies for what he says and how he lives. So let's not forget the last bit of the Sermon on the Mount when he said, "Blessed are you when you are persecuted for my name." And this is the ugly part, and if you want to try and tune me out, you can, but the Holy Spirit won't let you. It's important to keep this in mind. Following Jesus will eventually lead us to be persecuted. It's just a fact of life as a Christian. We are in the West, and we are not used to that. Those in the East face it more, and in the global South, a lot more. We've lived the last 500 years or so in relative freedom and mostly in power. But now it's shifting, and it's shifting very quickly. And we need to gain resilience. Dig our roots deeper. And I find the best way that Jesus teaches us resilience is to suffer. There's not very, very many other ways that we learn to be resilient in our faith than by suffering. But let's also not forget that we are persecuted because of our faith in Jesus and not because we're foolish or careless or uninformed, arrogant, or unloving. We are to be persecuted for Jesus' name, for standing up for the truth, for being honest and having integrity. There's one more aspect that we need to remember about salt, and that's over-salting. Has anyone ever had food that's had too much salt in it? It's gross. And it comes to a point that has too much salt on it, you cannot eat it. Bacalhau is soaked for 24 hours to get it soft, but to get all that salt out. And the water is changed to get that salt out, because if we served you a piece of bacalhau that hadn't been soaked in water, first you'd break every tooth. But it is so intensely salty, it's disgusting. What does that mean for you and I as Christians if we are the salt of the earth? If we oversalt someone, we become intolerable to them. We are to gently season, just as Jesus did. And we need wisdom and prayer to know how much is right and then leave it there. It does more harm than good to dump everything we know, believe, understand on people. Instead of making the conversation more flavorful, we end up ruining the whole thing. And just a really quick story, the first university that I spoke at in EuECA, which is about 2 hours north, or 2.5 hours north, there was 1/3 Christians and 2/3 non-Christians. And as the questions came, and it was over an hour of questions, at the end they did an evaluation, again, anonymous, and I got the results back several days later. And it was overwhelmingly positive. But there was this one comment that I hope will live with me forever. And I found out they actually knew, because the person actually wrote her name on the evaluation. So she wasn't embarrassed at all who she was, and praise the Lord. But she was not a believer, and she did not like Christians or Christianity. And her evaluation was this: I hate Christians less. Victory.
Yes. Yes.
Victory. It's just a little salt here, it's a little salt there. Now, what if I had gone in there and gone all evangelistic and just dumped my salt on? The comment would have been different. I know it would have been different. I hate Christians even more, or I was right. For me, that is one of the greatest comments that we need to be aiming for more, because we are a society and a church, for some odd reason, of results. How many Christians have you made? How many people have you led to the Lord? The next time a church asks me that in Canada, I'm going to say, I don't know, but I just know one person hates me less. Are you still going to support me?
Yes.
I want to conclude with verses 14 to 16. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. The purpose of light is to have it, to use it, not to hide it. A hidden light actually serves no purpose at all. So as lights, we shine. And what does it mean to shine? Jesus says in that passage, shining as lights means doing good things. So yes, it's possible that we can glorify God with more than just our words. I want you to get back into your small groups. My time is over. But I'm going to steal. Can I get 2 minutes? Can I steal 2 minutes? 2 minutes. Okay, so you have to work fast. Pop quiz. Get into your groups and really quickly. I would like you to come up with 5 ways in which you can shine your light for your students. What good things could you do that without speaking will show the light you have in you and bring glory to God? And next session, we're going to start with your answers, because some of the things you say might inspire everyone in this room to do the same thing. So quickly, get together if you need to. If you want to do it by yourself, go nuts. 5 things, 5 ways that you can shine your light to your students without using words.